Hi, and welcome to your first lecture for Anatomy 2. We're going to start out with the nervous system, and we're going to really talk about the organization of the nervous system, the different cell types in the nervous system, and that's going to be really what we're going to talk about in video 1. And then the next video will focus on neuron physiology. So here's just kind of a cool picture I like to show everybody at first. It's the nervous system isolated from a dissection, and you can see how it's very intricate and goes throughout your entire body. So first, let's talk about the functions of the nervous system. So the nervous system is your number one controlling and communicating system. Close behind it is the endocrine system, but nervous system is first. What it's going to do is it's going to monitor change inside and outside of the body, and these changes we refer to as a stimuli. A stimuli or a stimulus is a really important word to understand. It can be anything from changing of light to seeing something, to temperature. It really can be many different things. It's just a change. This input that's gathered is called sensory input. The input is then basically processed and interpreted, and we decide what to do with it, and this is called integration. Then, through what we call motor output, we cause a response to occur. So we're going to activate a muscle or gland to respond to that stimuli. So this is a great example here. Let's say that you see something running towards you. That's your sensory input. We're seeing something run towards you. Your integration is always going to be at your central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. So when you see something running towards you, you're probably going to want to run away. So our motor output would be activating this skeletal muscle here so that you can run away from whatever is running towards you. So this nervous system can be organized by structure and function. When we look at structure, your two big classifications are going to be the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system, which is going to be your spinal nerves and then everything that's coming out of the brain and also all the nerves in your limbs. Then we can classify the nervous system by function. So the sensory division is going to be the division that's going to bring messages to your brain and spinal cord or your central nervous system. So this is all your sensory input, bringing information to the brain and the spinal cord. And really, we have somatic sensory fibers. These are going to be fibers that are delivering impulses from your skin, muscle, and joints. And then your visceral fibers are going to be impulses coming from the various organs in your body. So far we've broken it down into here, our structural divisions, our central and peripheral. Then we started to break it down into our sensory division, which is going to send impulses to the brain and spinal cord. This is a great chart to come back and look at when studying for this because it really does give you all of this information. The last division we're going to talk about is the motor or efferent division. So you must know that motor equals efferent, I just remember it as me, M-E, and sensory equals afferent. Those are interchangeable, so you need to make sure that you know those. So the motor or efferent division is going to carry impulses from the central nervous system to muscles and glands. So this is your motor output. And there's two major divisions of this. We have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic means somatic means voluntary, meaning you can actually control this division. So this is going to voluntarily control skeletal muscles in your motor output. The other division is autonomic, and a good way to remember the difference between autonomic and somatic is autonomic sounds like automatic, which means that it does it automatically, or it's involuntary. You don't have any control over it. So this is going to be your cardiac and smooth muscles, glands, and this actually divides down even further in what we call sympathetic and parasympathetic, which we get into later on in a different lesson. So now we're going to talk about the supporting cells of the nervous system. Neurons are our major cell type, but we're going to talk about all the different cells that actually surround neurons, and we call these glial cells. And they don't transmit messages like neurons do. They also are constantly going through mitosis or cell division. Remember that neurons don't do that. Neurons cannot divide. The neurons you are born with are the neurons that you have. So these are all of the different supporting cells that we're going to talk about. And let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to get into the location of each type of cell and the function of each type of cell. So the first cell type is called an astrocyte, and these are star-shaped cells. I'm guessing that's why they named them astrocytes. And these are found all over the place. They're very prevalent in nervous tissue. And what these do are actually really interesting. So what they're going to do is they're going to take some ends, remember they're star-shaped, so they have stuff sticking out of them, and some of these are going to actually attach onto the neuron, and then some of them are going to attach onto capillaries. And what this does is it's really cool. These astrocytes literally bring nutrients from the blood capillaries to the neuron. So if you look, here's your astrocyte. See why we say it's star-shaped? Some of the ends are going to cling to blood vessels and some are going to cling to neurons. So what this does is these astrocytes are literally filtering nutrients here, making sure that everything is safe and what the neurons want, and delivering those nutrients and substances to the neuron. Then we have microglia. These are pretty simple. These are going to be kind of your white blood cells of the nervous system. They're going to go around and take care of any dead neurons and any dead bacteria. Then we have ependymal cells. These are going to line the central cavities of your brain and spinal cord. So these are actually going to be lining the inside of them. And they have hair. And cilia is hair. So they have all these little structures sticking out of them. And what these do is they actually move like hair would. Okay, they move back and forth. And what this does is it helps to circulate cerebrospinal fluid, which is all the fluid inside your spinal and brain cavity. And it really forms kind of a protective layer around your brain and spinal cord. Oligodendrocytes, that's a mouthful. I always crack up when I say that word. So oligodendrocytes, these are going to be found in your central nervous system. They're wrapped around what we call myelin sheath, and we're going to get into more of what myelin sheath is. But basically, this is going to wrap around your neurons and form kind of an insulating layer around the neurons of the central nervous system. Okay, that's important to know right there because oligodendrocytes are only found in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are pretty much the same as the oligodendrocytes, but they're found in the peripheral nervous system. That's the big difference. They still form myelin sheaths around neurons. So here's the myelin sheath that is formed by the Schwann cell in our PNS. And then satellite cells actually are going to surround the cell body of a neuron. Here, it's in purple. And it acts as a protective cushioning around that cell body of the neuron. So both of these are really found in the PNS. Now we're going to get into neurons, which are our major cell type of the nervous system. These are the ones that are going to be able to transmit body messages extremely quick from organ to organ. And we're going to basically go through all the major parts of the neuron and how it works. So the cell body is your major metabolic center of the neuron. This is where all of the organelles are going to be found, including your nucleus and nucleolus. Because even though a neuron is very specialized and allows messages to be transmitted, it's still a cell. It still has to make proteins. It still has to make ATP. It has to do all of the normal cell functions. The reason that it does not contain centrioles is because centrioles are the organelle that helps create the mitotic spindle. And we've talked about how neurons don't divide, so they don't have centrioles. Then we have processes, dendrites and axons. So your three major parts of a neuron are going to be the dendrites, axons, and the cell body. So the dendrites are going to be these little processes that are going to basically get incoming messages from other neurons or cells of the body. And then axons are going to be the fiber that takes the messages away from the cell body and pass it on to another neuron or go to a body cell. And the axon hillock is this basically cone-like region of the body where the axon starts. So if we look at this picture here, you're going to have lots of dendrites. Dendrites you're going to have hundreds of them kind of sticking out, attaching to a whole bunch of different neurons. You're going to have a neuron here, you're going to have a neuron here, so you create this huge network. And here's where all of your organelles are found. Okay, so this is your cell body. So we have dendrites hanging off of the cell body attached to all these other neurons. Then you have the axon hillock. And the axon hillock is where the axon starts. So something to notice here is you have really one axon, but you can have hundreds of dendrites, and you only have one cell body. The axon is just a really long process here. So axon terminals are at the end of axons. And these can branch into hundreds or thousands, and they contain neurotransmitters. And if you remember back in Anatomy 1 when we talked about muscle contraction, we talked about axon terminals kind of coming into contact with muscle cells. So these axon terminals can either be basically going towards another neuron, or they can be going towards another body cell. So inside of these vesicles are called neurotransmitters, like acetylcholine, the one that we saw in muscle contraction. And basically these neurotransmitters are going to stimulate something else to happen. So here's our axon terminals here, okay? And in these kind of bulbs here are going to be all these little vesicles that contain the neurotransmitters that are going to stimulate the cell next to it. And at the end of those axon terminals, we have the synaptic cleft. So here is another neuron. This is a neuron here. This is the axon terminal of a neuron here. So these are two different neurons. Cells don't actually touch when we look at neurons. They don't actually ever touch. They have a very tiny gap. And this tiny gap is called the synaptic cleft. So when these neurotransmitters get released from these vesicles, from the axon terminal, they actually diffuse across the synaptic cleft onto the next neuron or body cell, which then activates this cell. And we call this a synapse. This is when one message is passed from one neuron to the next neuron. So going back to myelin sheath is a very fatty material that covers neurons. And if it's in the PNS, it's going to be Schwann cells, and if it's in the CNS, it's going to be the oligodendrocytes. And what's really important about these myelin sheath is they actually increase the rate of nerve transmissions. They make them really, really fast. And that's a really key thing when we start to get into different activities here in this lesson, is to know that it's going to increase the rate of how fast a message gets traveled from one neuron to the next. And then when we look at our PNS neurons, there are going to be little gaps between the Schwann cells and the myelin, and those are called nodes of Ranvier. This is really cool actually how this looks. So here's a Schwann cell, there's the nucleus, and this Schwann cell basically creates a jelly roll of this myelin sheath around your neuron. And I love this picture here. I love any time you can look at a real microscopic picture and really see what you're looking at. So this really dark layer here is the myelin sheath. You can see how thick it is actually surrounding that axon. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and stop here for video 1. Please go back and rewatch if you need to fill in any of your notes or cover any more topics, and then we will continue on with neuron terminology in video 2.